Yeah, and I think, I think people should know that there are multiple pathways to get to a more fulfilling work life. That actually, not everybody needs to have the same definition of what we call freedom. I have clients that actually hate traveling. They don't want to travel like me. It's not about traveling for them, and so for that, some of them is actually just about better work. I want to do better work. I want to challenge myself to actually go after positions and do more meaningful things with what I believe I'm capable of.
Hello, I'm Nelson Jordan and welcome to the Working From Home podcast. Today I'm with Lydia Lee of screwthecubicle.com. Lydia, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
You're quite welcome. So you've got a much nicer background in terms of a home office than I have at the moment. So where are you based?
Well, I'm in Bali on the other side of the world, and I'm pretty lucky to have plants I can't kill too often in the tropics. Lots of cacti. I have a lot of cacti and just things behind me that don't need too much water, to nourish. So I'm very, very, very thankful that I'm here at where we're speaking in quarantine during these crazy times.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like my house is full of succulents. So they don't take too much water, and it's very much like I'm in charge of them rather than my wife. She's got a nasty habit of overwatering them. So coming every couple of days and just being like, oh, those need some more. But they don't. They're drowning. Yeah. They're drowning in water. Stop it.
Totally. We don't need another thing to fight about as a couple living in too close quarters these days, right? Another thing off the plate would be nice.
Exactly. So how long have you been in Bali for?
Well, it's coming up. It's September the 13th is my 7th year anniversary of living in Bali. So it sure does not feel like 7 years, but I also don't remember what life was like before this island. It almost feels like I had this sort of chapter change right at Bali, and then life was just completely different ambiance and vibe, So this has been my home, my main base, and then originally, as I told you before, I'm from Vancouver, Canada, also a beautiful base. But Bali is the place for me these days.
Fantastic. And was Bali always going to be that place for you, or did you kind of move about before kind of seeing Bali and was like, right, I'm going to settle down here?
I was never supposed to be out here more than 6 months. So this was originally my plan 7 years ago when I left Vancouver. It was purely an experiment. At the time I had 2 businesses going. I had my first business that I was running in the international education industry, which is where my old career and my old occupation was. And then I had Screw the Cubicle, which at that time was just a little blog, a kind of side business that I was experimenting with. And taking those 2, I just thought, could I take a stab at this location independent thing? I've read the 4-hour work week about 6 times, and somehow it never really clicked for me. I think maybe because the examples in the book were like programmers and coding guys and IT tech guys. And I was never that kind of girl. Yeah.
Scalable.
Amazon drop shippers. Yeah, those guys. And I never really thought I could do that because I had such a client-facing service, for both of my companies. And I just thought, what? I didn't leave the cubicle to kind of be held back from the lifestyle choices that I was wanting to create for my life. So I do pride myself as a bit of a problem solver. And I thought, well, what if I make this into a way that I could continue to work with people without sacrificing, intimacy and personalization and good service. And maybe they'll just get used to me not being at an office. I rented a very small space in a co-working office in Vancouver to see clients here and there, but not everybody came. Things were still done over the phone and over Skype and, all those things at the time. So I thought, what, let's give it a shot. If the worst case scenario, I'll move back to Vancouver and, back to where I began. Sure. And so I kind of set a boundary of time because I never traveled on my own before in this long of a duration, and also to such foreign countries that I've never been before, and very third world countries as well, right? And so I thought 6 months is probably about the right time. And I think that allowed me to kind of go into it with an open mind and less pressure of it sort of having to become something, that I was had big expectations about it, because I just thought it's just kind of like an experiment. And if it doesn't work out, I have an exit plan. It didn't feel so permanent perhaps for me to do that. Although I did have some hindsight to sell all my stuff. I just remember thinking, I don't really want to bother with a storage unit and having to pay, in Vancouver, a storage unit is like the price of a villa in Bali. So it's like, why am I doing that when I could be, it's not furniture I'm so attached to, like antiques and whatnot. They're IKEA furniture and, whatever else I can probably rebuy again, So I was very happy I made that decision to not have that sort of weight on my mind about having to go back and sort stuff out, and really gave myself that's almost sabbatical, to go ahead and do something different. And then I traveled through Cambodia first, and then I came to Bali. I was actually creating a course at the time, so I needed somewhere quiet. And someone suggested this very tiny little town in Bali called Ubud, and I never heard of it before. And it had it was the only co-working space in all of Bali, a place called Ubud. And then I came here, and then I didn't leave for 6 months. And then I decided, I think I just need to keep renewing. And I didn't return back to Canada until 3 years later.
Wow.
So that's how quick life takes a turn, whether you expect it or not.
Nice. So it sounds like there's a couple of things there that you talked about that made things easier in terms of, okay, first positioning it even in your own mind as maybe a 6-month trip, rather than I need to make this permanent decision for the rest of my life. It sounds like from a psychological point of view, that probably helped ease any potential anxiety that came around. So that's very interesting to me. I think too often we kind of think like every decision that we make is going to be permanent. There's no way back from this.
Yeah.
Where in reality, I think, that can change. My wife is thinking like that at the moment. She's taking some time off work from teaching. She's a primary school teacher. And one of her concerns is, well, if I take a few months out of this for personal reasons at the moment, will I be able to get back into teaching so easily? And okay, yeah, it's a valid concern, but I think especially with this year, 2020, how that's gone.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be so many people in that position. It's almost a bit of a moot point, but and sometimes,
when I was going to say that, like, as we are in this COVID thing together, it kind of sometimes feels a bit easier to make those decisions because everyone else is dealing with it. It kind of feels like, well, I can't make a mistake, right? If the whole world is having to start from here, right? And I think sometimes decisions are harder when no one else is doing it, and then you have to, it's sort of like, you can't blame an external virus or, external world epidemic, right, for it to make that decision. But it's a great launching pad for like, hey, let's just try something new because it can't get worse than this, right? In that regard. But you're so right. Like, I think at that point, I knew myself enough to know my obstacles, and my obstacles were always myself. I had to figure out ways to kind of get out of my own way to create new things because I am a type A personality. I've always been a perfectionist my entire life. I've always been a high achiever my entire life. And to make small changes was difficult for me, for such a long time, partly because I think no one else around me was doing it. And it didn't feel safe to do that when you don't have this guidebook, of like, here's how all these people have done it before you, and you follow that trajectory, like a corporate career, right? But I think I knew that I had to set smaller goals and smaller and more predictable, realistic outcomes that were the right intentions, rather than, oh, I'm going to start a brand new life somewhere and it's going to be amazing. It'll be better than Vancouver. I'll earn twice the revenue. Like, these sort of things, I literally cannot control what that experience looks like. But these sort of small boundaries, like 6 months, allows my sort of ego mind to go, well, it's not forever. It's not permanent. You're not going to screw it up so badly that you can't come back from this, and also little things like finding locations that have co-working spaces and a sense of expat community also were some of those conditional safety nets, that allowed me to kind of keep taking that leap as often as possible too.
Sure. So it was about kind of not going to a completely foreign land. And I don't necessarily mean that just as a location, also as a bit of a metaphor in terms of, okay, there's still got to be some familiarity there with my past kind of working conditions and expectations and stuff like that. But perfect. Well, totally. we're going to kind of explore some of that in a few minutes. But first, I kind of want to backtrack and talk about screwthecubicle.com. Obviously, you were running two businesses. It sounds like when you were kind of on the way and thinking about, okay, should I go to Bali or not? How did you kind of decide to focus on one over the other, and what did the first kind of 2-year period look like?
The first year was interesting because it was sort of you really didn't know what you were doing on the first year. I always explain that the first year of business is equivalent to how I feel like 10 years of therapy feels like. It really challenges you as a human in so many ways. Talk about a boot camp for resilience and change and navigating uncertainty, right? In that space. But even so, during my first year, the first business that I picked was in a lot of ways that safety boundary I needed to create for myself, and that first business was what I would call these days a transition business. It was a business that wasn't very far away from the corporate career I had. I knew that industry like the back of my hand. I was very successful in that industry. I had gathered the assets, if you will.
What industry was that, Lydia?
International education.
Great.
So I worked with schools, like not a teacher like your wife, but I worked with schools to help promote, higher education and English programs and summer camp, winter camp programs in Canada for a particular school. So it sort of felt, again, like a safe, transition to take that leap into a business that I had contacts in, that I had experience and expertise in, and also it helped me to get on my foot and hit the ground running a bit faster, than starting a business that I needed more experience in, or more time to sort of consider what to do. And actually, my employers ended up being my first clients because my strategy was to negotiate a consultancy position with them instead of the partnership they offered me. So it was kind of a weird meeting because they were like, here's a partnership we're about to offer you. You're the youngest person we've ever offered a partnership to. And I said, no, I do not want to be a partner. And instead I want to quit. And I would like to be a consultant. And would you be my first clients?
Oh, well, it obviously worked out.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't wasn't calm sailings the whole time either. I can't say that. It was interesting to navigate sort of what was my responsibility now versus what parts of my role had to be, someone else they hired. There were also some things that were, in hindsight, I think I probably should have jumped into that relationship so quickly. It just, again, felt like a low-hanging fruit. So I just thought, hey, I do good work here. I'm making these guys a ton of money. It would be their benefit not to lose me completely, and we could create a win-win situation. So the pros of that is that I negotiated something that helped me to land about 20 to 25 hours a week as a consultant for their school, and then bought me some time to work on my own agency and, take clients on that way. The con of that, which is a story that some people don't know about my transitional story, is that 6 months after we started working together, I got a letter in the mail after I finished my first project that I was getting sued by them.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So yes. So that was what I meant by non-plain sailings. I had to also learn a lot about the legalities and how things work, when people feel threatened by something you're building, because they couldn't understand that I was building something on the side and perhaps I was poaching clients or something like that, which was very obviously something I would never do ethically. But they did, one of them was a lawyer. So they kind of thought, well, I don't know if Lydia should be doing this. And they just sent me this letter. And it's really interesting that they never communicated that with me verbally. before sending me that letter. So I learned a lot about standing up for myself. I learned a lot about my rights as a business owner. But it was a scary time, receiving that notification to show up at Supreme Court, not just provincial court, Supreme Court, that I might have made a mistake, and I had to get a lawyer myself, figure out that if I did anything wrong, and I didn't, luckily I persevered and sort of came out of that unscathed in a way, but it scared the crap out of me, having that first impression of in business being sued for the first time, but that never ended up going to court, right? Which was the good news. And so then, as this was all going on, I had also created a blog called Screw the Cubicle at the time, which was only meant to be an online space for me to journal about my transition experience, my identity crisis that I felt leaving corporate into an unknown territory, the questions and the pushback and, all the projections I got from my friends and family about my decisions I was making. And that was really just meant to be this indulgent project that I think I had on the side. And then people just started reading the blog, and it wasn't until a lawyer from Toronto, this woman that emailed me that was reading my blogs for a few months and said, I love what you've been saying. I'm going through a mid-career and making some of these hard decisions you've been making. How much do you charge for coaching? And at that time, I didn't know what a coach was. So I had to Google this and figure out what that meant. Was it a therapist? Was it, something I had to go back to school for? What was this about? But that really set that. It was kind of the catalyst, that set me on that path of going, I wonder if this could be something I enjoy more, because the first business was practical. It made me money and it replaced my income, but I didn't feel meaning in what I was doing. I was sort of replicating what maybe was already unfulfilling for me to do at corporate, except I was the boss. And that I thought would have ticked the box of happiness. But then I really discovered I'm just a kind of gal that needs to have meaningful work that I was proud of and believed in order for me to really do it,
I mean, that's super interesting, right? Because there's so many different reasons that people end up working from home. I mean, for now, I think we'll just focus on you making that choice to work from home. There are plenty of times, especially this year, when people kind of have that choice made for them by the macro environment. Really, they're kind of forced into that situation. But in terms of when we actually choose it, I kind of went through a similar journey with that as well. Very very similar actually. In terms of,
did you get sued as well?
I did not. But it's funny you should say that. Actually, one of my friends and ex-colleagues is getting sued at the moment.
Wow.
And it sounds super, super similar to your position, right? I think they're being accused of basically everything it sounds like you were being accused of, and they're just as guilty, i.e. they would never do that. It's so funny when you somebody. I kind of feel like companies are in this position and at the moment probably trying to save money and stop kind of paying any fees that they deem kind of unnecessary to people. And I think sometimes, unfortunately, corporations like that fall into the bully role and try and use that position of power. And you kind of think as an individual, I'm here on my own, essentially, and I'm responsible. If they come after me, then that's like a whole nother level of stress on top of just like normal working conditions. I've still got to make money. I've still got to serve my clients, and now I'm going to have to fight this court case. Actually, it's very funny you said that, because I'm having the same sort of supporting conversations with this person right now. Obviously not a lawyer, so just approaching things from kind of common sense and like emotional and trying to be kind of rational and logical about it and just offer a helping hand as much as I can do. But there's only so much like a non-legal person or somebody that doesn't spend hours and hours researching this thing can actually do in terms of helping. But yeah, no, so really, really interesting in terms of when you said kind of working from home, there's elements of working from home that are just, you're replicating your job in a way, or your situation, and you're just changing a small amount about it, which is namely the location and the hours, right? So that's kind of the kind of working from home, I guess, position one, that you've taken what you had here and kind of made a couple of changes, and now you're sitting here. And then there's kind of the working from home kind of position two. There's got to be better names for this. We're going to have to come up with some. But position two, I'm guessing, is kind of like, okay, not only are we changing kind of location and working hours, but you're also kind of changing your day to day. So you might still be in the same industry, but you're taking a different position in that industry, or you might be in a completely different industry in a completely different role. I mean, my kind of story is that about 3 years ago now, I wanted a change. We were living in Birmingham at the time. I was working for a very good digital and PR marketing agency called WPR, based in Edgbaston in Birmingham. Always, really, really great to me. Always kind of gave me as many opportunities as I wanted. I started off in social media, then I wanted to move to PPC, and they were like, okay. And then search engine optimization, and they were like, yeah, fill your boots. And finally, kind of conversion rate optimization. So I thought I was kind of pushing it when I was like, look, Birmingham isn't for me anymore. Love the city, but just need something else. Need a change in lifestyle. And I basically kind of expected that to be parting of the ways, really. I would kind of move on. They would thank me. I would thank them. And then I would have to go and find something else. But they kind of offered similar deal to you, really, in that I wasn't going to be a consultant. I would still be a full-time employee for them, but I would do so from somewhere different. And then fly back every month, have my meetings in a block, and then fly back again, which I was like, are you sure? This sounds very much too...
I'm going to say yes before you change your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And we're in the time where actually not very many of anybody at the company got to work remotely, even working from home. So I was like, this sounds like a trick. But yes, I'm going to bite your arm off.
Yeah.
But we did that, and I did that for a year. Eventually the traveling got too much for me. So after about a year, I kind of made the decision that I would start working for myself in a very similar area. So kind of digital marketing still. And my, ex-employers again ended up being my first client, which was a much kind of smoother transition. So that worked out really, really well. And I think that's just something to be said. If you trust your employer, or at least kind of your direct line manager to kind of take care of you, and you think, okay, there might be some leeway there to obviously safeguard yourself beforehand and put like plan B, plan C, plan D, all the way to Z kind of in place as well if you can, but to kind of have those discussions with your employer to see if there's anything that can be done there if you're interested in doing the same kind of work, right?
Yeah. And I think, if I was to do it over again as well, is I would have probably set a bit more boundaries. Sometimes you get just so excited that, oh, great, I didn't think you would say yes to this. And you sort of go, okay, let's just do half the hours and, away we go. And I can work from home. And just like you, I was a bit closer to the office, but it was only about a 10-minute walk from my house. But I had sort of opted for sort of once a week meetings and things like that. But I was still getting, like text messages, and like I didn't have a very structured way of receiving that communication. And so it still felt like, you're right, like I've changed locations. I might not be wearing a suit to work, and I get to work from home and maybe get a walk in between my lunch and things like that. But I was still at the schedule. of a 9 to 5-ish, right, routine, which was interesting. And that was something I had to go through to go, I wonder if it should be like this still, right? Like, can I be a bit more mindful about how I get things done in a more productive way that allowed me to still produce great outcomes and still produce awesome work every week, but on my terms. And how do I set that up in such a way that earns their trust, but also gives me that autonomy over my time, and it's interesting that, as we are going through this sort of global pandemic, and a lot of my clients, for example, are also working from home at the moment. And in the beginning, it was kind of like, it's what I wished for, and now it's happened, which is great. But it's still not exactly, I'm still not self-employed. That's what they'll say. And I'll say, well, listen, what if you looked at this as a transitional period where you're using this, you're being paid, okay, to almost give yourself an internship of what it feels like to work from home, how to assess yourself to sort of know how you like to work when you're not being pushed into a cubicle or in an open office or whatever it looks like. And how could you actually batch your work or be more productive, or how, what's your style of working that allows you to get more done in less time so that you can, right, have that reward of time freedom or flexibility or spend more time with your children, whatever that looks like. So it's actually an opportunity here rather than, it just isn't exactly self-employment, but you've been given a gift, you're still getting paid, that's a really good win already. Some people are not in that position. They've been laid off, and that's a lot harder circumstance. And secondarily, you could use the circumstance for good as a bit of a training ground so that when you do work for yourself, it's not going to feel like such a shock about how to organize your days and how to organize your time and, tools that you can use to really help you be a better remote worker. So count your blessings and, use this as a really big piece of learning time to learn more about yourself.
I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. I think just the recognition that working from home doesn't mean the same to everybody. And it doesn't need to be, right? There will be certain people who are okay doing the same job and quite happy to do that, but just want the end of like their commute, for example. So my last guest, Rob Jones, he kind of basically wanted to carry on doing the same job, was really, really happy with the job, was really, really happy with the company. And then actually COVID gave him kind of an enforced, which is probably what he wouldn't have chosen, kind of deadline for that happening. And instead of him just kind of having the flexibility of work from home so that he could, spend more time with his son, so that he could spend less time on the daily commute. And I think that is a position that loads of people would actually like to be in. They kind of think that there's no in between, so you're either working for a company 9 to 5 in their office, or you're working for yourself with your own clients from home or anywhere else in the world. But actually, it's quite interesting. There is this in between. There is you're doing a job that's very similar, but you're doing it in a more flexible way that suits you. And I think when people think about working from home and they hear about, there's all this growth in terms of working from home, they naturally jump to, the position on the end of the spectrum, right? Which is you completely working for yourself. You bringing on your own clients, you being responsible for all of your accounts, all of your invoices, all the contracts, everything like that. And actually, I think the middle is where a lot of the growth is going to be. So people doing something very, very similar, but just in a slightly different way that more benefits them in terms of their lives.
Yeah, and I think, I think people should know that there are multiple pathways to get to a more fulfilling work life. That actually, not everybody needs to have the same definition of what we call freedom. I have clients that actually hate traveling. They don't want to travel like me. It's not about traveling for them, and so for that, some of them is actually just about better work. I want to do better work. I want to challenge myself to actually go after positions and do more meaningful things with what I believe I'm capable of, and to others, it is about having that choice of, especially for women, that where if we decide to have a family, if we decide to, unfortunately, we can't pass the buck to our male counterparts just yet about, being pregnant. And we don't want to worry.
No seahorse.
Yeah.
Take my babies from me.
That's right. Yeah. And so, it's sometimes going, well, I would like to continue to have that security of the job that I want. But I also, in a lot of ways, maybe in the first couple years of when my kid is growing up, I do want to be there a lot more than just from 6 p.m. onwards. And I don't want to maybe shove my kid into a daycare. Maybe I do want to raise my children in a more personal level, and how can I make that choice without sacrificing security? Right. And the good news is that the world, corporations and organizations and everybody in between are now being enforced to adapt. Right. And I don't know if this is such a bad thing. I think is great for the future of work, is providing people more happiness, and happy people are just better producers of work anyway, and then there's going to be less sort of, sick days and mental wellness days to be taken because of the fact that people have a bit more balance, and that's sort of what I'm hoping that we come out of this crisis in with the silver lining, in that we can adapt towards and go, what, it was hard to go through that, but it helped us to get more creative, in thinking about a new way that we can continue to work and continue to be employed. It doesn't have to be self-employment, but that organizations have taken, they can say remote work isn't so bad after all. People weren't just laying on the couch eating potato chips all day. They were working, and they are happier, and maybe they'll be more loyal to our company. That's always a good thing too.
Yeah, definitely. I think COVID has just been an accelerant for so many things that were already happening, and has probably just brought them forward by a couple of years. One of the things that, we can get into it now or another time, but is this kind of assumption, though, that like working from home is the right thing, or has been kind of easy for everybody across the board during COVID. And it's just not the case in my eyes. Although I don't really like drawing this distinction that I'm about to make, but it is quite a useful shorthand. But you have kind of the difference between white collar jobs and blue collar jobs, and COVID has impacted them in massively, massively different ways. There's a ton of white collar jobs that people are actually discovering, and I think a lot of people knew, but maybe bosses and companies were reluctant to hand that freedom over, or that loss of control. But white collar jobs, a lot of them can be done from home. Not all of them, and not all of them well or perfectly. I think a lot of the technology, the software that it is missing at the moment, there's a lot that needs to be built out in the next 5-10 years to get that to a good position. There's so many interactions that are missed, that aren't big enough to kind of merit an email or a Slack channel or anything like that. It's the interactions that you would have in an office normally with colleagues. Those are missing at the moment. But then I don't want to kind of gloss over it and say COVID has been, just a good kind of benefactor with this specific working from home, accelerating remote work, because actually a ton of people that I suspect would love to work from home, but in blue collar jobs can't. So it's just very interesting, that kind of dichotomy there. I want to bring it back for a minute and kind of talk about Screw the Cubicle again, and how you kind of went from that first coaching client You're talking about like, hang on, what even is a coach? Can I do this? Do I need to go back to school? How you kind of grew that, how you thought about, okay, maybe there's some legs in this. Maybe I can kind of make this my full-time role, and that kind of journey.
Yeah, I think it was, if it wasn't for that woman, and I know, I owe her a lot in the sense of being the planting seed for me. But it also, again, kind of part of the same thread of the thought we had about these boundaries, right? That I allowed myself to come to Bali for, right? That 6-month period of time. It was kind of the same mindset in a way when I thought about what can I do with Screw the Cubicle. And I had limited time as well, because my full-time energy was actually growing the International Education Agency, right? That I had already started. And so that Screw the Cubicle was a side hustle in a lot of ways. It wasn't even a side hustle. It was just a side blog. And then it sort of was like, could it be a side hustle, And I did it, to be honest, Nelson, at the time, I never thought about it replacing the agency I started. It was purely, again, an indulgent project to go, I wonder what can happen here, and I think, but in hindsight, I think that was the best thing that I could have done, because the minute, I think, if I had said this had to replace my full-time business, or this had to work and I had to make it work and it had to produce me this kind of revenue, is when I would have talked myself out of pursuing that, because all of that was super unknown to me. So I had to kind of make it into a game. I had to make it into a thing that wasn't with these solid, concrete outcomes of dollar figures at the end of it, or whether or not this had to become beyond a blog, And so what I thought about was, well, what don't I know, right, about this idea that can allow me to make the next step happen for myself. And the next step was not to launch a business. The next question to ask was, would I like coaching? What does a coach do? What would people value in if I was to coach them? Those were the questions. It wasn't about, can I launch a business, right? And so in order to find the answers for those questions, I really thought about my days when I graduated from college and higher education, like when I went into the work field, when I too was fuzzy about where I belonged in the work world. And internships were such a big, we didn't balk at the idea of internships. We didn't say, I get paid so much less to do an internship. If anything, you were grateful for the opportunity to try something, get your foot in the door, right? And kind of see where you might take it and shadow, different people and go, oh, is that niche of my industry that I want to go in and not this one, after seeing, right, what happens in a day-to-day basis of that person's life. And so I thought about that and I went, I really wish I could do an internship on coaching and see if I can try on that coat for size and see if I like it before I start to spend time and energy and effort into this thing. Because I knew by that time how much effort it takes to launch a business. I wasn't going to do another one except, unless I did it in a more sustainable, healthy way, And so then I basically pitched to this woman that I never really considered coaching. I was very honest about it. And I said, but what I do know is that I have gone through a lot of what you're about to go through. So I may not have an official certification to coach people at this point, but if you're looking for someone that can help guide you to kind of see the forest from the trees and maybe share some of the deep questions that I had to ask myself as well. I've already spent thousands of dollars on therapy and a business coach. So, maybe I could bring some of that juice into helping you figure some stuff out, And so I sort of was like, I have armed myself with some, information, knowledge, and experience. And I sure as hell know what it feels like to go through a career transition, And so, what I knew was that I did not want to coach about business at the time because I didn't feel ethical to do so, because I had not, in my eyes, had a successful business yet that I felt gave me the right to teach, here's how you launch a business and be a successful entrepreneur. But so what was a much more in my head, a more moral thing to coach on with what I have gone through and has achieved in my personal life, right? And so I said, could we do kind of a 8-week coaching experience? I'm not quite sure yet what exactly we're going to do, but after talking to you about what you're going through, these are some of the ideas in my head. And what I would love to do is actually just offer that to you complimentary, because you can help me in an exchange for my advice and my experience to help me build something that will be really valuable to people. And she said, sure, I would love to do that. I didn't think that was what you would offer anyway, so bonus round, for both of us in that sense. And then I decided to take that intention and get more guinea pigs to come on this ride with me. And again, being very honest that this was my self-made internship to kind of dabble into this. And here's what I'm willing to do. Here's the kind of people I'm looking for. There's no guarantee in what happens at the end of this all, but I know that you're alone anyway, so you might as well, work with someone that has gone through what you're about to go through. And if we don't like each other halfway through, we can break up and it's fine. No hard feelings. And, we'll learn from each other, and you'll be kind of a case study for me, and you'll be supporting me in creating an offer if I choose to do that, and making sure that's validated by some real humans. And people were really, really excited to do that. So I gathered 8 case studies to work with for 8 weeks. And that was a huge learning process for me. I learned who I did not want to work with, and I learned who were the right fit. I learned what problems I could solve that were valuable. And I also learned about problems that I never want to solve again, like people's marriage problems that they would have brought to me sometimes through the sessions.
Yeah, so
yeah, knowing where I stood and how do I navigate that? But I wouldn't have found that out if I didn't work with people at all. It would have been these fantasies in my head, whether I can do it or not do it or this and that, and talk myself out of it eventually, And so that was a really necessary stage for me. And it was so powerful for me to start this new career that is really embedded into how I coach my clients today as well. Till now, every client that's ever worked with me have done a beta test. They've done an internship and they create that themselves. And that has made a world of difference in how they launch, how confident they are when they start telling the public about what they do, and getting that credibility and experience that they really need before they even get out there in the real world.
Very interesting. And you said a lot of really, really great stuff there. So I just want to recap and kind of summarize it for some of the listeners. So the first thing that stood out to me there was, you didn't use this word, but was authenticity. So you felt uncomfortable talking about the business aspect of that in terms of, well, actually, I don't have a super successful business right now. So you didn't feel kind of ethically and morally that you could talk about that. But I do have this experience. I do feel qualified to talk about this, even if it's not from kind of an academic theory kind of level. It's literally personal experience and analogy, and how that might look like for you. And I think that works really well in terms of kind of gelling with people. I think people feed off that authenticity when you can tell stories about stuff that happened to you. Like, okay, being sued, how do we approach that? Obviously not the ideal one, and nobody else has to go through it, but you do have kind of in the trench experience of what to do, and that's absolutely fantastic. So there was the authenticity part that you mentioned. There was focusing on certain areas that you feel qualified to look at. But also you talked about the stuff that you didn't want to do, right? So the problems and the barriers that you had to set up in terms of, I don't want to be somebody's marriage counselor. I'm here very much to talk about that kind of career transition moment, what that looks like, how you can kind of set yourself up for success. But then also the kind of beta tester aspect of it. Like, I think in the US, you guys probably call it beta, don't you?
Beta,
Canada,
that's right.
Yeah. Beta.
We're Canadian.
Yeah,
very different.
I know. I think a lot of the listeners are Americans, so I have to occasionally change these moments.
We're always the disregarded cousin, that little cousin in the back that no one cares about.
Oh, well, I mean, I think the UK is that as well, right? We're a lot smaller than you.
That's right.
So actually not coming up with a service or a product in isolation, listening to people and getting real feedback on what they want, and giving them that something, finding that kind of, if you're thinking of like that little Venn diagram, the stuff that you want to offer and the stuff that they want to receive, and kind of finding that sweet spot in the middle, which is really, really nice.
Yeah.
I've worked with a lot of startups and small businesses, and to try and kind of coach them both on the e-commerce side, but also on the lead generation side as well. And too many of them jump straight to the product that they want to offer rather than the product that the customers want.
Yes.
And they spend all this time.
It's like that lean startup method, right? Like not to really produce and spend money and design, but really just test a market for need, right? And I think services, when we think about lean startup, we think about startups, we think about apps, we think about, right? Like AI stuff, right? But in services, actually, it's much easier to do it in services.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Because it's like sometimes you could think about, I remember thinking about, well, how far do I go? Like when do I stop? That was also a question I had in my brain was, okay, I knew that I started in the crossroad, right? Should I quit? Should I leave or should I go? And if I went, what would I need to do to figure out what's next for me? And I knew how to do that. But at the end of the day, it was also about, well, where would I feel complete? What would be sort of a goal we're trying to meet here? Is it the clarity of, their skill sets, that could be redeployed in a different direction? And once I found that, then I've done my job. Or does it end at, that we come together even after knowing that, and I'm not in control of when they quit. That's not my job. Right. There's so many other factors that I can't be responsible for. Right. And that was something I had to learn as well, because I used to be very involved in people's outcomes. And it was something I've had to learn as a coach, to not be so emotionally attached to people's outcomes, because they have their accountability and responsibility to reach those outcomes as well on their own. I'm just a guide. But even knowing where to stop and how to wrap it up and how to, really set them up for success, so that what I'm teaching them in the habits and the mindset and the problem solving skills that they've developed through that experience can be taken beyond the time we spend together. And that's when I think that impact is really made. Rather than here's a report on your career skills and here's what top 10 things you can do with your life. Like that's not helpful, in my opinion. You need the muscles, the tools to navigate change and transition beyond this experience,
So these days, what does your kind of service offering actually look like?
Well, to work with me directly these days, my core offer is my 90-day launch program. So this is primarily focused on professionals that are usually, there's two batches of people, but 80% of them will be sort of career transitioners that are professional mid-career people that have already decided in some way or another that they want to leave their corporate job. They've done a bit of work in understanding the types of skills and tools they want to be using going forward. But it's kind of a fuzzy idea. It's like, I think I want to be a copywriter. I know I want to write, but I'm not sure who it's for and what I'm writing. And, how does this all work? And how do you get clients and all these things?
You're basically just describing me there.
Right. Okay. You're an ideal client profile. Great. And the caveat, this is the other part of it. It's not just anybody that wants to launch a service-based business. My approach is about ensuring that business is designed from your strengths, your values, and your personality. So specifically for people that care about their work, they want to do meaningful work, and they value really building the foundations of how they operate in that business, how they market, how they spread the word, how they share that vision. Not because someone said funnels are the only way to go, right? But that you are really intentionally making choices in your business, from how you want to work with clients to the design of how your services look that's in line with your type of personality type. And also how you want to field clients and bring them in, doesn't have to be a big marketing strategy that I think sometimes people don't really have the stomach for, nor do they want to be this big empire. And what I find is my soulmate clients, the clients that I are just like, this is the perfect person, and we have a great time getting a business up and running, are not specifically just about what business they are doing. I do specialize in service-based businesses, but what is the sort of alignment between the both of us is that we want to enjoy our lives. So work is not the end all, but it is the vehicle that's going to allow us to impact and create a difference in the world, which I think is important to both myself and my clients. But they also don't want to be a slave to the business. So they don't have this ego to say, I need $1 million business for me to feel successful. Their redefining of success is more about time, flexibility and autonomy, and knowing what's enough. What's an enough number that we need to make in order to afford us the life that we want and the security of a pension or whatever it is that you're saving up for, right? But we're not going after big numbers just because we think that's going to make us feel good and look good. We're very intentional about the revenue you make, why you're making every dollar with a purpose, and how do we set up the system that you're not working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to get to those numbers. But I think most importantly, at the launch stage, it's very easy to get caught up in the bells and whistles of what we think a launch is, right? We need the email list. We need the 5-step funnel. We need the Facebook ad. And I mean, I'm not saying that those things aren't important to certain businesses in certain stages, but in the beginning of a business, I don't think it's the only way to get clients, especially if you're not a techie person, and especially if maybe your jam is relationships. Good old-fashioned relationships that are offline and online, and you don't care for a big email list, and you produce high-touch services that you don't need that many clients. So your way of recruitment and marketing might be very different. So my job is to challenge that status quo and go, who told you that you had to have an Instagram channel at all? What is your way of communication and influence, and how do we pick the right mediums that give you that that approach, so that you're not grunting and groaning when you have to market because it's not in line again with what you want to do. 80% of my clients are introverts, which is an interesting statistic. I'm not quite sure how I attract introverts. I don't find I'm an introvert. I have introverted qualities, but I think I have more extroverted qualities. But I think what attracts them to me is probably the message of that you can build a business that feels like you. And if we can do that intentionally, you might actually build a business you want to keep and not fold and fail because you either get bored or you're doing stuff you don't like. And it's, you know what I mean? It's hindering your success because you're not naturally drawn to do these things. It feels forced.
No, that makes a ton of success. I mean, because I run, how many businesses at the moment? A few businesses, shall we say, at the moment, in some in similar fields and some in like diverse fields. So my digital marketing business is based mainly around Facebook and Instagram ads. And then my copywriting business is kind of completely separate to that. And that is more of a kind of direct kind of marketing approach that I take for it. So actually, the Facebook and Instagram stuff has like a completely different way of bringing in leads than the copywriting stuff, just because it works better. The copywriting is more kind of relationship built for the lead generation tactics that I'm doing at the moment. Anyway, it involves a lot of talking to people, a lot of reaching out to them on LinkedIn. And you don't necessarily need that big channel just to kind of get up and running, which is quite interesting. Cool. So are there any, for anybody that's kind of in this space in terms of, I guess they're mid-career, they're working a job that probably isn't going to be their forever job, if there is such a thing these days, and they are kind of thinking of alternatives. Are there any kind of like transition tips that you've got or resources that you can point them to in terms of getting them into that mindset of like, okay, what do I need to think about? What do I need to prepare?
Yeah, there's a couple. I mean, I really love teaching and sort of training people on, depending what stage you're in, that I think there's not sort of one package of training that like, here's all the things that, you'll need to know. It all depends on sort of what your goals are and what it is that you're trying to achieve at this moment in time. So there's a couple of resources that could be helpful. The first place I always sort of get people to go to is my Start Here page. The Start Here page will tell you a little bit about, my philosophy and my approach to work. But it also showcases 3 particular trainings that, depending on which pathway and sort of what stage you're in the transition journey, there will be a training session and a workshop that I hold for free that allows you to sort of get started with this path, right? So for example, the first starting point, first pathway you could choose is, I'm ready to reinvent myself, but I'm not quite sure what I'm reinventing into. I just feel a call for change and, some sort of adaptation to my life and work. So that webinar is called, how to reinvent your life and work to truly live out your version or your vision for a meaningful life and career. So in that one, it talks a lot about sort of the questions you should be asking yourself at the moment and taking stock. Right? Giving ourselves a bit of a pause to take stock about what it is that isn't causing fulfillment for our lives, and really break down the purpose of us to make that change. What's working? What isn't working? What has my body of work potentially have already laid out some clues for me about what's next? Mm-hmm. What are some things that maybe I've already been pondering on doing, but may have some fears and obstacles in the way. So you might be clear about what you want to do, but your job for what's next is to actually help to create those safe conditions, right, for you to take that leap without taking too big of a bite that you can't chew. So maybe some of the things we talked about today could be a seed planter of smaller steps, less about big goals, mm-hmm. more about movements you can control. Right. And that's really what's going to lead you to fulfilling that vision. And then there's some trainings there about, what business should I start? And that training is all about how do we reimagine work and reimagine that sweet spot of work we could do that's in that intersection of skills, deep interest, and impact. How do we marry that into our experience? So that might be a good training for you if that has been your hungry question. What business should I start? That's probably the best training. And then the next one, is basically how to launch a business you love. And we talk a little bit about what are the components, what are the foundational elements of a business that isn't complicated, that isn't, that's what's essential to you to get started so that you're not overcomplicating the process to start a business and being more holistic and attentional about what you actually really need, and not to fuss around with too much technology or marketing tactics that isn't meant for you at the stage you're in. Mm-hmm. Like I always say, when you look at people in a 10-year business and you compare yourself to that as a first-year business, you're comparing yourself to a grade 10 and you're in grade 1. Mm-hmm. They're doing different things to go through grade 10. They have a team, they've got a budget, they've got money, they've got a list. It's not going to be the same tactics you're going to be using when you're just building your brand. And also maybe with a long-term higher end service, your marketing tactics could be very different. It could be very intimate of an approach rather than mass mail or mass ads that might need to be happening, right? So we want to be more intentional. So that webinar covers that, for example.
That's great.
And then in terms of like navigating remote work, so if people are just actually working from home, they're not necessarily wanting to be an entrepreneur, but they want to learn better ways to work from home, or how to pivot and adapt to changing times during COVID-19. I believe I sent you an email about the link for a 5-part COVID series that I did during the beginning of COVID, which is, again, absolutely free. And there's many topics to pick from there that will allow you to either think about how to make a more productive workspace and manage your time more appropriately as a remote worker, all the way to now that you can't go to conferences and network in real life physical spaces, how do we build genuine relationships in the internet in a way that isn't spammy and, kind of unethical. So whatever the topic is around that, you might be able to find a topic there too.
That's perfect. So to recap, to get hold of those resources, they can find them on screwthecubicle.com, right?
Yeah, screwthecubicle.com. The trainings are right in the homepage, but if you go to the Start Here page, which is screwthecubicle.com/start-here, there's also a big yellow button on the top right anyway that will bring you there if you get to the homepage. And that's a really good place to start. I think that will just help you to navigate what you need. And there's even my top articles, depending on, again, which question you're asking. Is it about career transitions? Is it about meaningful work? Is it about lifestyle independency? My best articles are featured there as well. And then if you want to come say hello to me, there's a button to talk to me there. So, it's a good place to start. And then the separate link for the COVID workshops, hopefully you'll be able to put them in the show notes or something, and people can go there if they need that too.
Fantastic. Right. Well, I think that is a perfect place to leave things for today, Lydia. Thank you so much for joining us. I know our listeners will appreciate that, and hearing your story and how you actually first came on as transitioned your own career before you started doing it for other people as well. It's a fantastic story. So thank you again. Thank you for having me. I love this honest conversation. Quite welcome. And that's it for today. You've been listening to the Working From Home podcast with me, Nelson Jordan. We've been talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly side of remote work. Thanks so much for listening, and I really hope you've enjoyed the time you've spent with us today. If you'd like to discuss the podcast, you want to make a new friend, or you're interested in working with me on a copywriting or digital marketing project, then visit nelson-jordan.com. That's nelson-jordan.com, where you can also sign up to my newsletter to hear about this podcast and other exciting projects. Until next week, goodbye.